Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming. So we have a good group here to listen and talk and ask questions to Mr. Bob Seebohar, who is one of my favorite people in the whole world. He is just amazing. Like, just from a personal perspective, I met Bob probably a decade ago now, who was one of our swim clients in a webinar or a seminar that I did with Olympian Sheila Tarmina. And I got a chance to meet him and learn about his life and swim. And I was just telling him, like, I feel like I need to be watching your underwater video right now. and he needs to be telling me about trail running. But yeah, so that's how we met. So, but let me tell you guys about Bob, and you are very lucky to be on this webinar, because listen to what all Bob has done. First of all, he has more than one graduate degree, which is amazing. He has a degree in health and exercise science, as well as food science and human nutrition. He is a registered dietitian. He has worked as a sports nutritionist for Colorado State University, University of Northern Colorado. He's been director of sports nutrition at University of Florida, and was a sports dietitian for the Olympics Committee, where he helped out in 2008, and I'm sure has done other things since then. He also owns a company called eNRG Performance. I think I'm saying it right. And he's all kinds of certifications for strength and conditioning, including NCSA. He's also a triathlon USAT coach level 3, and maybe even higher than that now. But he's worked with lots of Olympians on their sports nutrition. He himself has run a bunch of Ironmans. He's run Boston. He's done the Leadville 100, which is a mountain bike race. And he's also done the 100 trail run, which Leadville is like the highest city in the country. So it's pretty incredible. Plus, he's done the Leadman, which is, okay, get this, you guys. It's a marathon, a 50-mile mountain bike, a 50-mile trail run, a 100-mile mountain bike, 10K run, and a 100-mile run, all in the span of 7 weeks at altitude. So this guy knows what he's talking about, and he knows his sport, and he knows his nutrition. So he is like one of basically the premier sports nutritionist in triathlon and multi-sport, pretty much like in the world. So we're like beyond excited to have him for this hour to listen to the questions that we have and to tell us about, you know, stuff he knows, and just introduce you guys to all that he does and is. So with that introduction, Bob, I just kind of wanted to ask you kind of like, what got you interested in wanting to learn about nutrition and stuff like that? And like, how did you find yourself in this position, in this place?
Yeah, well, first off, Ali, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. That is by far probably the best introduction I have ever had in any speaking engagement or anything. So thank you. I appreciate
awesome.
that. You said my last name correctly, which doesn't happen. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So kind of long story medium, right? Not long story short, but I grew up as a competitive athlete. I was actually a land athlete, I call it. So I grew up a competitive soccer player. And, you know, in high school, never knew what the heck I wanted to do. But I was fascinated with the human body. Like as an athlete, you know, you're just like, wow, how does this, like, why is he faster than me? And why can she do this? And nobody, like, so I was just very intrigued, and I had a lot of questions. So that led me to my first undergraduate degree in exercise and sports science, exercise physiology, and still had a lot of questions after that. So after that undergraduate degree, I worked in the real world, I call it, for a few years, and got a little bored, right? And this was way back when. And I knew I was missing kind of a piece of the puzzle for me, because that's actually during my undergrad is when I first got into triathlon. So if I can date myself, my first triathlon, sprint triathlon, was 1993. So wow, right? Okay.
that's the genesis of triathlon way back then. So that's cool.
It really is, yeah. And back then, like, we didn't know much, you know. I mean, there were very few coaches. I mean, Joe Friel was just getting started. He was actually in the same city I was in where I did my degrees, and you know, I just had so many questions about it. But then, as most of us do, right? I spent a few years in sprint and Olympic distance. Then I moved up to half Ironman. And then it was like everything blew up, right? Meaning my stomach, really. So as a soccer player, we didn't have to really worry much about nutrition during training, right? But now as I was getting longer, I felt I was finding that I had GI distress. I couldn't figure out this thing. And remember back in the days, it was basically like we had Power Bar and Cliff Bar, we had gels, and that's like it. Like we didn't have any of the cool stuff we have today. So I was getting a lot of GI distress. I was scratching my head. I did my first Ironman in 1999 and, throwing up, that whole thing. And I'm like, man, I got to figure this out. So that kind of led me a little bit more, with my exercise phys and strength and conditioning, more towards the nutrition, because I thought maybe I could learn something, right? Biasly. And I've made a career out of it. And I absolutely love it. Obviously, I am an endurance athlete. I do a lot of different things, crazy things, but that's kind of how I started in this whole thing.
So you kind of made your hobby your job out of necessity. That sounds good.
Exactly.
And I feel like some of us could feel like we could probably have a job out of all the different things that we've tried in sports nutrition and failed. I know for me, there's been a lot of trial and error.
Right.
So that's good. That's for sure. Oh, and should mention to you guys, not only does he know this stuff, he's also written a book, which is what I have. That's what I read the bio out of. This is a book called Metabolic Efficiency Training, which you should totally get. And this is not supposed to be a commercial for Bob. I just love Bob so much that I just want you guys to know how great he is. So anyway, this is one of the books that I really reference a lot. So, but anyway, I wanted to just kind of have an informal Q&A today with like questions that folks have and just kind of like introduce some concepts. So one of the kind of like first thoughts I have is maybe kind of if you could sort of give a kind of an overview of like what would be the simplest way for athletes to really start taking charge of their nutrition in their daily life and racing, and like what's the best way for someone to start and not be overwhelmed? Because I know for me, you read all these magazines and there's all these articles about all these grams, kilogram, and all that stuff. How do you make it simple?
It's kind of a mess. I mean, it's been a mess in sport nutrition. Like I've been in this for over 20 years. It was a mess back then. It's even more of a mess now because we have obviously social media, the internet, like all these food companies coming out like crazy, right? These sport nutrition companies. And it is so hard for me to keep up on it. I don't know how athletes try to do that. It's amazing, right? So that said, a quick story. When I first got out of school, after doing my second graduate degree in food science and human nutrition, I did my internship to become a registered dietitian. Then I took my national exam, my registered dietitian exam, and then I had my RD, right? I went to town. I was hitting the pavement, working with endurance athletes. And I thought I would take what I learned in school and apply it to endurance athletes. And that was calorie counting, grams, carbohydrate, protein, fat. And I loved it. Like I'm kind of a quantitative person when I need to be. So I was putting together these plans and these graphs and everything. And for about the first 3 months, athletes love them, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? And then until they started calling me up in quite a bit and they said, this plan is great, but I'm standing in the grocery store and I don't know what to buy, right? Because all of this is numbers based. So 300 grams of carbohydrate, 200 of protein, whatever it is, right? And they're like, what do I do with food? That was my aha moment, Ali. That was when I was like, oh, wait a second. Quantitatively, we should not be describing food as numbers, right? We should be describing food as how it interacts in the body, how it metabolizes, what it does for energy, recovery, all this stuff. So I changed my tune really early on in my career, and I've developed some really easy implementation strategies. You see them in my Metabolic Efficiency Training book, but I believe the best thing, thank you. The best thing athletes can do is literally like, number one, take the diet handcuffs off, right? Diets do not work. It's really about fitting in nutrition. And really my philosophy is how do we periodize carbohydrate, protein, and fat based on our health goals and based on our training cycle goals, right? So as our training ebbs and flows, goes up and down, our nutrition should support that, right? So that said, drop the diet handcuffs, stop calorie counting because it's inaccurate anyway, right? I mean, if you need to do every so often, you use an app and do that, like every so often, I think it's fine to educate yourself, but every single day, I just think there's so much more we could be doing in our lives, training, recovery, spending time with loved ones, whatever it is, right? So like 30,000 foot level, I think we just need to get away from those numbers. And that's daily nutrition. I should have qualified this. Daily nutrition, we really want to kind of tune into what we call our intuitive eating, hunger signals. We want to look at our blood sugar control, and we want to look at food, right? Now, if you talk about training nutrition, like what we're doing right before, during, and after a swim, bike, run, we do need to be a little bit more quantitative, because we need to fuel and hydrate our body very, very accordingly based on what we're doing. So I guess that's where it kind of separates with the daily nutrition and then the training nutrition. So daily, very qualitative. Training, you do have to splash a little bit more quantitative in there, which we can talk about.
Math. One of the things I thought that was so helpful in your book were these graphics. I don't know if you guys can all see this. These are what he calls periodization plates. Can you kind of tell them a little bit about what those were about or are about?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and so I was finding way back when that athletes were just having problems putting food together, right? And I was trying to break the mold of let's get away from numbers and just into more of a visual perspective. And, you know, back then, before we hit this super like convenience food, fast food thing, I figured, you know, most of us eat on a plate, right? So why can't I just visually put together a plate that will be periodized based on the training cycle? And that's what you see there. You see plates for base training. You see plates for training with intensity or race season. You see plates for off season. So really what it is looking at your plate in partitioning sections for protein, for healthy fats, for carbohydrates, which are fruits, vegetables, grains, starches. And what it does, as you see, is it shifts depending on the training cycle. And the reason, if you guys don't know this, the reason, and this is called nutrition periodization, that's another term that I coined early in my career. It's basically, we're shifting the nutrients on the plate to account for your energy needs, which is driven by your energy burn or energy expenditure based on your training, right? So if you're in base training, early base, and you're putting in, you know, maybe 6 to 8 hours a week, well, your nutrition needs to be supporting that, right? But if you're in kind of a high prep mode, high intensity, kind of prepping for racing, maybe you're at 12 to 15 hours a week, well, and you have more intensity, you have more repeats. Now our nutrition has to shift to support that higher intensity. And not to confuse it too much, but maybe you're training for short course versus long course, right? Changes happen. Maybe you're younger or older, changes will need to happen. Maybe you're a female or a male, changes will need to happen. So that's what the periodization plates kind of allow, that graphic visual representation of how you put together food on a plate.
Yeah, I thought those are just great, and they show different ways to do proteins, fats, whole grains, and fruits and veggies in terms of like a pie chart. It looks like a plate. Well, that actually gets into one of the questions that Charlene had. I totally identified this question. She says if she's looking to shed about 10 or 15 pounds and she's in the middle of training for a half Ironman, what would kind of be the best way to do that, and sort of like how to measure whatever the calorie deficit should be, or whether she should be looking at certain macros? It sounds like that's kind of the answer. And the reason that I had this question was near and dear to my heart was when I was training for Ironman back in the day, my very first one, I gained 10 pounds. And I think it was because I was probably just eating too many carbs. I don't know, but I totally get this. Should someone be trying to lose weight during the middle of training, or should that be an off-season thing? Like, how do you approach that kind of question?
That's a great question, and one that is very confusing, and one that is a little bit frustrating, to be honest with you. And I've been there, done that too. Like I put on weight training for long distance races, Ironman races, and you're like, what the heck is going on, right? A lot of marathoners do that too. And they're like, this is not making sense. Like usually that's the whole, the eyes are bigger than the stomach phenomena. But let me go back. So one of the questions was, is this the appropriate time to look at changing body weight or body composition? What I say is this, and I love that you brought that up, because if Charlene, if you were coming to me and we were having this conversation, the first thing I would say is, where are you in your training cycle? Meaning, do you have quality training sessions where you're trying to improve speed, improve power, improve efficiency or speed in the water, whatever it is? If this is a cycle where you're really trying to increase your performance, it may not be the best time to actively pursue weight loss or body composition changes. We can still do it, but what I wouldn't want to have happen is that we change your nutrition and then all of a sudden your performance markers start to go down, right? So, but not to muddy the waters, we can do both. And I'll talk about that here, like how to do that in a second. But I just want you to make sure that you kind of classify what is the goal here. I love to get, I mean, if I had my druthers, I love to get athletes in that early base or off season to try weight loss. But again, we can do it most times throughout the year. I don't recommend it during a kind of a crazy race season because that's not a good thing, right? But you might have enough time now, depending on where you're at in your prep for the half Ironman. Okay, so that said, let me go back to this whole thing. How do we engage in weight loss or body composition loss? Well, it's not as easy as what I was taught in university, which is still being produced out there, is, oh, just create a calorie deficit of 3,500 calories a week. That equals 1 pound of fat loss. Guys and gals, it's not that easy. It's just like the thermodynamics and the biochemistry of that, while it may seem correct, and I thought it was correct when I was going through school, it doesn't work that way because every nutrient, carbohydrate, protein, and fat, has a different metabolic fate in the body. So they burn at different rates, and even within carbohydrates alone, if it's low fiber, high fiber, right? High glycemic, low glycemic. So what I would say is this: we need to bring everything back and focus on one thing, and that is controlling and optimizing blood sugar. And this is why blood sugar is so important. So if you imagine a roller coaster, right? And roller coaster goes up, maybe not a roller coaster that goes around and twists and curves, but just one that just goes up and down, right? Throughout the day, here's your blood sugar 101, right? Throughout the day, your blood sugar should go up and down about every 3 to 4 hours, right? In what's called a non-disease state. So that's assuming you don't have diabetes really, or any metabolic disorder. So if I'm saying your blood sugar goes up and down every about 3 to 4 hours, that's about when your body should be signaling yourself, your brain, your body to eat something, right? But here's the whole dynamics of this. When your blood sugar is high, and I'll say this slowly, when your blood sugar is high, insulin has to come in. It gets secreted from the pancreas. So blood sugar is high, insulin comes in, insulin is high. One of the roles of insulin is to reduce blood sugar because we don't want high blood sugar, right? So now insulin brings down blood sugar and you're happy. You go on about your day, you're satisfied, everything goes well. Except this is what a lot of people don't know. And this is my whole nutrition philosophy, right? Is controlling blood sugar. When insulin is high, it just about turns off your body's ability to burn its internal fat stores. So if we're talking about weight loss and body composition changes, especially fat loss, if you don't control your blood sugar, you will constantly teach your body to burn carbohydrates and store fat. So here's a food example, because here's what we know about blood sugar. We need to usually combine carbohydrates, protein, and fat together in certain amounts, if you will, to have a stable blood sugar curve, right? It's never going to be flatline, but if we can just prevent those really high spikes, that's the key, right? So, and it's all because of insulin just about turns off fat burning. So food example, if you eat a banana is a totally fine carbohydrate. I don't use good and bad. I don't calorie count, don't do any of that stuff, right? But a banana is carbohydrates, right? So if you just eat a banana in about 10, 15 minutes, it's going to raise your blood sugar, spike your blood sugar, and you'll be feeling great for about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and then you're going to crash. And then you're going to feel hungry again, right? So as that's happening, it's literally that eating that banana is turning on your carbohydrate burning, turning off your fat burning. But if you add a protein and a fat with that banana, i.e. peanut butter or nut butter, right? Now just putting that nut butter that has protein and fat in it with that banana, it doesn't spike your blood sugar anymore. So now it controls your blood sugar, and all of a sudden you have better blood sugar control, which means you're burning more of your fat. And here's the thing, if you do long course tries or long course anything, you need to focus on how do I best use my body fat as energy. And I don't care if you have a body weight goal or a body composition goal. If you do long course, you need to teach your body to burn fat as energy, right? Because the other thing is you need to be concerned about storing as many carbohydrates in your muscles as possible. until you really need them, right? So if you take Ironman as an example, right, there's going to be a time somewhere throughout Ironman, because Ironman is typically done at lower intensity than a sprint and Olympic distance. There's going to be a time, maybe you're climbing a hill, maybe you're trying to play cat and mouse with someone on the run, whatever, where your intensity goes up a little bit. And what we know, not to confuse you, but what we know about intensity, as intensity goes up, your body needs more carbohydrate. But we also know, especially towards the end of Ironman, when you're on the marathon and now all of a sudden you're feeling like dead legs, right? That's usually, I mean, we won't talk about the training part of it, right? That's usually because you've relied so much on your carbohydrate stores, or I call it your gas tank. You're almost empty of carbohydrates and your body isn't good at burning fat. So now your legs feel like lead, right? So there's a lot of things we need to kind of focus on here, not only for fueling properly, but let's bring it back to the whole weight loss thing again. If we focus on controlling blood sugar through combining carbs, protein, and fat most times throughout the day, then no guarantees in life, right? But usually I see really good success with weight loss and certainly body fat loss. So that's a long-winded answer to that question.
That's a really good answer. Yeah, because one of our other questions was whether there's too much or too little protein when we're talking about endurance. You know, is there such a thing as overdoing it? But yeah, I absolutely identify with that. I just had a banana the other day, and while I was eating it, I was like, I should probably have some cashews along with this, so that I don't, spike my blood sugar and crash a few minutes later. But that's true, because I think most of us don't think about that. We just think of snacks. Snacks are snacks, but they really, a snack, I guess a snack is not a snack.
Well, and if I could just kind of put in, being an endurance athlete myself, I know the perils we go through, both from training, but also nutrition. I will say this in very much confidence. 98% of all endurance athletes I have ever worked with or continue to work with, we always are deficient in one specific nutrient, and that is protein. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ali, right?
Okay.
My thing is, if I could just, when I work with endurance athletes, if I could just change their approach to food, and you kind of mentioned this, Ali, if you say, okay, today I need a snack, if you can just answer this question first, where is the protein? Here's the thing. It's not that protein is more important, but it's the most forgotten macronutrient in an endurance athlete's daily nutrition plan, right? So if you always think about where's my protein, then you always build in the carbohydrates after that. But I don't want the opposite to happen, right? So with you, Ali, you would say, hey, I'm going to have, like, in the back of your head, you're going to have a banana, and I know it sounds silly, but you're like, okay, nut butter or cheese or whatever protein it is. And then, oh yeah, I get the banana with that, right? So it's just a little bit of a paradigm shift.
It reminds me of that 80s commercial with the little old lady. Where's the beef?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
We have to ask ourselves. So you guys, that's your take home so far. Where's the beef? It doesn't have to be beef, but some kind of protein. Well, that's interesting, because Mike asked the question. He's a type 2 diabetic, and he's been doing triathlon he's 61 for about 6 years. And he's talked to a lot of dietitians, and they're used to really sedentary people. And he's kind of been experimenting with carbs and what seems to work. But he wondered if you'd work with those kind of folks, and kind of what would be some basic advice along the same lines.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I applaud you, Mike, for doing that. I mean, type 2 it's not, I mean, it's difficult to manage, especially if it's fairly new. I don't know how long you've been living with type 2, but it's fairly easy to manage, to be honest with you. And obviously there are different extremes here, based on the type 2 itself. But here's the thing. There's actually a lot of research where people can actually reverse type 2, specifically diabetes, not type 1, but type 2, through dietary changes. And so I've looked at this research, and all of it comes back to this. The end product is the optimization of blood sugar, right? So there are some people that go crazy and they go ketogenic diet and all this stuff. But if you just kind of pare back the nutrients and control blood sugar, I'm not saying you can reverse type 2, but I'm saying you can control it so well that it doesn't become as much of a challenge. So that would be my goal, especially Mike, is focusing on protein first. And then, of course, I don't know you as an athlete. I don't know what distance is or what your training cycle is or training plan, but I would always focus on protein first and then sprinkle on the carbohydrates, the vegetables, the fruits. If you're in a heavier training cycle, that's where I might introduce starches, but I would be very careful with those. A lot of us, here's the other thing that I'm just going to kind of blow your minds. a lot of us endurance athletes actually overconsume carbohydrates at inappropriate times of the year, right? And that's the whole concept of nutrition periodization, right? Carbohydrates aren't the bad guy. Fat isn't the bad guy. Protein's not the bad guy. It's just a lot of times we eat too many carbs at the wrong times of the year. And Ali, you mentioned it, right? You gained weight before your Ironman. A lot of people do that. And that's like a very inappropriate time, because here's what happens. And I'll come back to Mike here in a second. Here's what happens when we start training. We get all excited, right? It's first of the year. Usually we've got these goals, these races. We're hopefully kind of post-COVID now, so we're getting all jazzed. And all of a sudden that excitement leads into the, okay, I'm training, I'm doing great, but maybe you're only doing like 6 hours a week right now, but you're eating for like 12 hours a week, right? Because you're so excited, right?
Yeah.
So that's the whole periodization. Like we need to ease into it, but that's again where the protein comes into play, because here's another thing. Allowing yourself to eat protein to balance your blood sugar, right? Which, and I should say this, I should qualify. I do say an increase in protein only because I know most endurance athletes don't get enough protein. I'm not emphasizing a high protein diet, right? I just want that protein to get up to where it needs to be. That will actually keep you fuller longer, right? So now all of a sudden you're not going to be having that craving to eat as much, right? But coming back to Mike, I think the main thing is really focusing on, I would say, protein and vegetables first, vegetables as your primary carbohydrates. If you need more carbohydrates, then you go to fruit, and then you go to whole grains most of the time.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. I think it was on the last webinar that I told everybody that I confessed to everyone that my favorite, this is terrible, Bob, my favorite training meal when I was really training for some really long distance swims was a filet of fish and fries at McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
And I think probably what I was sensing there was that I was needing fat, and that I probably wasn't getting enough of that. I know that supposedly, it's a very slow, well, not supposedly, definitely it's a very slow digester, but that in some way, somehow that weird combination of like carbs, fat, and a little bit of fish, like somehow it just worked it out. And I'm talking about swimming really slow, like 8,000 yards, easy. Right. But I think it's that intuitively I knew I needed maybe not that terrible quality of things. More of that just to help. I did end up transitioning more to like a one of the Hammer Nutrition protein mixes. I think they call it Perpetuum, and that worked really well for me. So, but yeah, that's cool. So speaking of foods to avoid, Chris wants to know kind of what foods would be foods to avoid during an Ironman. Is there a generalization one can make about that, or is it person specific?
Yeah, good question. My philosophy is staying away from those terms good, bad, avoid, eliminates. But here's the thing, point blank, you should avoid foods if you have a certain medical condition, if you have a food allergy, a food intolerance. That's when I think of avoiding, right? Now, on the other side of it, I think you should probably reduce or decrease, and kind of where you were going, Ali, a lot of the processed foods, like the lower quality, lower nutrient dense foods, we just don't need a lot of those in our daily nutrition plan anyway. Like it doesn't matter. Like we should reduce those no matter what training cycle you're in. I would say this though, with foods that might disrupt the GI system. So again, being an athlete who has had a lot of GI distress and, fix that through blood sugar control. I would say any food that may predispose you for any stomach issues, just in anything that feels off, if it's bloating, if it's gas, if it's just like something doesn't feel right, I'm not going to say avoid that food, but maybe take it out to see if that's the culprit. Like that's a lot. I mean, and I say that because I'm seeing a lot of athletes these days present with intolerances. They're not clinical intolerances. So maybe you don't have lactose intolerance, but maybe you are intolerant to a little bit of lactose, right? So it's not a clinical diagnosis, but the reason I say that is I think a lot of athletes go through their lives with, and I did this too, when I was, again, back in the days, because this is what they taught us with the whole food pyramid, I was chowing down the carbohydrates like crazy, because remember back in those times, it was like, yeah, eat as many carbs. You're an endurance athlete.
All about the carbs.
Yeah, exactly. And don't eat too much protein, don't eat too much fat. And I did that. And I would constantly, like I would be bloated. I felt, just puffy and kind of heavy. But back then, I was a little bit inexperienced at that time. That's when I was going through school when I started in triathlon. And I would ask people, and they'd say, oh, you're a triathlete. Oh, you're an Ironman athlete. That's par for course. Like you should feel like that. And I didn't really like that response. That's what led me to go back to school. Is like, I don't like these responses I'm getting. There's got to be some other science behind this. But
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question, but I really
Yeah,
don't
it
feel
does.
there's a lot of avoidance of foods unless there's a reason to avoid food.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things I've wondered and kind of come to my own little plan of how I do things in my long distance stuff is real food versus engineered food. You know, for example,
Yes.
gels and bars. Something that an Ironman athlete should be concerned with is that, you know, because with books like Feed Zone Portables and things
Yeah,
like that, people can make their own little balls of
absolutely.
things. Do you think that's a better way to go than engineered foods just because they're more, you can control the ingredients, or do you think that it's more person to person, they have to see what works for them as far as convenience and digestion?
It's probably a splash of both. And I say
Okay.
that because you qualified it with your swim. You said that 3,000 swim that you did based on the intensity. So here's what we know. As the intensity increases, the digestive system doesn't like to digest a lot of food, like anything really, right? So as our intensity increases, like think you're doing like a sprint triathlon versus an Ironman, right? Intensity is much higher in that sprint versus the Ironman. As intensity increases, the blood actually gets dispersed from the gut and it goes to the arms and legs so it can provide oxygen and nutrients to the muscles, right? That means there's less blood in the gut to actually digest the food or the gels or whatever you're eating, right? So it is somewhat intensity dependent. So here's what I say. If it's kind of high intensity, if you're pushing yourself, maybe those engineered foods are going to be a lot easier to digest because they're kind of, if you think about it, they're kind of pre-digested anyway, right? They're usually semi-solids, liquids, you know, that kind of thing. However, if you do lower intensity or moderate intensity, or you have that iron gut, and we all love to hate people like that because I don't have an iron gut. I really wish I did. But the lower intensity or moderate intensity, and or if you have an iron gut, you can usually do real foods, right? So, but here's another thing too. Well, actually, before I say that, you see a lot of ultra runners and ultra cyclists eating real food. And that's because they are going so much slower than usually a triathlete will go, right? And you throw a triathlon into this mix, it goes all over the place, right? Because you have three different sports, right? You're in the prone position in swimming, and then you get up and then you're kind of shoving your gut into this little ball on the bike. And then you open it up on the run, right? It's like the most horrific experience for nutrition in that you could probably go through. But that said, I think there's a time and a place for both. This is a big mistake I see a lot of endurance athletes make. In training, they do a lot of real food, you know, so maybe they're making the portables or whatever it is, right? And then all of a sudden they switch, like the week or two before a race, they switch to nutrition products, like these engineered products. They don't know if they're going to work or not because you don't give it enough time, right? So what I usually recommend is about 3 months before your race, your first race, try either food or engineered products in your training sessions, the ones that actually matter, like the longer ones or the higher intensity ones, to see how your stomach processes those foods or those engineered foods. Because sometimes you do have to do, like I know myself, if I do something longer at low intensity, I always do food first, right? But if I drop into a sprint or like an Olympic distance, I will always do engineered because my body cannot digest real food at high intensities at all.
Same. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like that too. I know
Yeah.
some people, like I read one time, way a long time ago, there was this big football player that did Ironman. He said he ate, I think they were egg and sweet potato or egg
Yes.
and bean burritos the entire time.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
remember thinking, oh
oh,
no,
no,
that would never happen.
that just makes you kind of want to throw up right now, right?
I
Yeah.
know, thinking about it. The heat has such a factor. I know for those of us in the Southeast, Chattanooga, Ironman Chattanooga, half Ironman Chattanooga,
Oh,
Augusta, I mean, Louisville, these are like, well, sometimes Louisville, hot races. I mean, 100 degrees sometimes in Chattanooga. And like, that just complicates things because like,
yeah.
you know, your skin having to ask for all that blood and then your stomach is
Yeah.
left being like, hey, remember me?
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
let's see. Danielle wants to know. She's kind of changing the tune about now. Okay, so after workout, what about recovery? Like she likes the chocolate milk recovery drink. Is that a good choice? What are good things that you like to do after recovery for your, or
Yeah.
that you recommend for your athletes?
Yeah. I might blow your minds right now. I've been
Okay.
known to do that. Okay.
Okay,
So
do it.
recovery, like I'm going to air quote it, recovery nutrition is actually post-workout nutrition, right? So in my mind, recovery nutrition actually begins before the training session starts. Let me say that one more time. Recovery nutrition begins before the training session starts, right? So recovery nutrition really is your daily eating, because that's actually what's setting your training session up to be successful or not, if you really think about it. Because in a training session, we know we're using probably predominantly carbohydrates and fat, right? Not a lot of protein, not a lot of amino acids. So if you're not well fed or you're dehydrated going into a session, nothing you can do is going to save that session, right? So let me get off that soapbox. This is where I'm going to blow your mind. Post-workout nutrition depends on what your goals are. So there should be two goals. If you want to be metabolically efficient, or like controlling blood sugar is basically what that is, right? If you want to try to control blood sugar, which means you're going to teach your body to burn more fat instead of and store carbohydrates, that's metabolic efficiency, right? What you need to know is after almost any workout, your body is primed. It wants to burn fat like crazy, right? But usually we end up dumping a whole bunch of sugar in our body, and that disrupts that fat burning opportunity. So we shift it from fat burning to carbohydrate burning. And that's okay if that's your goal, right? Okay, so back to this. Goal one, I want to maybe lose weight. I want to reduce my body composition, or I just want to kind of, teach my body to burn more fat after these workouts. I don't recommend slamming carbohydrates. So I recommend more. So a chocolate milk is a 3-to-1 ratio of carbohydrate. So 3 parts carbohydrate to 1 part protein, right? It's got a lot more carbs than protein. If you want to maintain metabolic efficiency, teaching your body to burn fat and preserving carbohydrates better, you would do more of a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein. Okay. So that's goal number 1. If your goal number 2, where you're like, hey, I need to fill up my carbohydrate gas tank as quickly as possible, then yes, that chocolate milk would be phenomenal because it gives you more carbohydrate and a little bit less protein. There's a lot of other things that muddy that water, but those should be your primary 2 goals.
1-to-1. That's cool. I think that Fairlife brand is now making more of a high protein milk. I've seen that out there, Danielle. So maybe check out Fairlife. I know they have a chocolate version. They have a regular version too, which probably is lower sugar if you just want the milk idea or something easy and quick to buy. So that's cool. Oh yeah, Mike says it's excellent. That's awesome. Yeah, I really like it. That's good.
Like carbohydrates aren't bad. We just need to use them based on what we're trying to do in our body, right? And that's the thing, is we need to think about, what are we trying to do here?
I'm very intrigued by what you're saying about the idea of teaching your body to burn fat more. And you've mentioned things like, okay, so not slamming carbs right after your workout. And also, what was the other one? Oh, just generally, where's the beef? Where's the protein?
Where's the beef?
What would be other things? Are there other, things like that are like go-to tenets of the science of there?
Honestly, the biggest thing is controlling blood sugar. That is, okay. If like 90% of the time, if you can try to control your blood sugar every time you feed yourself, or 90% of the time, 10% of the time, we're human. We need to, enjoy some things, right? I totally get that. But that is really, like, if you were to say, what is the core of teaching your body to burn more fat? It is optimizing blood sugar. Then you've got the little things, right? Then you've got the, like I said, okay, after a workout, maybe you don't slam as many carbohydrates. From a training perspective, maybe you do some more zone 1, zone 2 early in the year to promote, because that, from an oxidative standpoint, cellular oxidation, you can teach your body, your cells to burn more fat. However, here's the thing too, while I'm on this topic, it takes a lot. Like if you said, okay, Bob, because I've had athletes do this, they've said, okay, I'm going to train in zone 1, zone 2 for 2 months during my base training, and I'm going to be awesome, right? I'm going to be a fat burning machine. Well, yes and no. Like, physiology takes a lot longer than nutrition changes to burn more fat. So what we see is over time, meaning over years and years and years, as long as, yes, you are doing some aerobic foundation training throughout the year, it doesn't have to be every day, you will build your body's ability to burn fat at the mitochondrial level. But it takes years and years, and it's good. It's just slow, right? Nutrition, literally, you can change your body. I've tested this because I do metabolic efficiency testing here in Colorado. You can change your metabolic efficiency just through nutrition changes alone in 7 to 10 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
7 to 10 days versus years, right? I know.
Yeah, that's fast. That makes total sense. Yeah, I wish I could come get mine done. I remember when I
Yeah.
read the book, I was like, where can I get this done?
Yeah.
Like, I want to
Yeah.
find out, because this is the thing I wanted to see in the book. I don't know if you guys can see this, but
Yes.
there are
Yeah.
these graphs that show different people and how they metabolize fat and carbs. And I'm pretty sure I know where I am just based on how often I want that banana. I'm pretty sure I'm like super far to the, I think it's left where you're mostly burning carbs. And I do
Yeah.
not think that my lines cross at all. I think I'm a
Right.
total carb burner. That's why
Yeah.
I'm very interested in this idea of moving toward the fat burning. And there have been, oh my gosh, you guys know, over the last couple of years, this whole, what's it called? Low carb, high fat. Oh my goodness. So hearing all this stuff, and I'm not about to do anything crazy like that, because I feel like as a woman, and I think Stacey Sims has talked to this,
Yes.
you know, really to be careful hormonally what you do
Yes.
nutritionally if you're going to get that extreme where you're going
Right.
to go something like ketogenic. That scared me a little. Like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And also I just want to live, you know, we as athletes, we're athletes, but all of us, let's face it, we are not Olympic athletes, at least on this call. We are in it for the fun and the performance and try to enjoy ourselves and get better, but we're not going to the Olympics. So we don't need to make like changes that make us crazy or our families crazy. But I definitely think so. Like, one of the kind of fad things that's been going around is intermittent fasting. And I know that, you know, Stacey has talked a lot about women should not be, you know, doing fasted workouts. And so, like, you said something about steady blood sugar. So would intermittent fasting kind of mess with that then? Because you're kind of like, you're hungry, but you're not allowing your body to eat because you're trying to intermittently fast between this hour and this hour.
Yeah.
So is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, I get kind of bothered with the whole IF intermittent fasting.
Me too.
Well, one, because there's no definition of intermittent fasting. Like, you could literally fast for 16 hours or 20 hours or 3 days or 7 days. Like, so like when someone says, oh, I'm intermittent fasting, I always have to qualify. So how long are you not eating? Because if you really think about, like, getting down to the nitty gritty, we should be fasting for about 12 hours every day anyway, 10 to 12 hours, depending on how much you sleep, obviously. But, you know, if we have dinner at, you know, 7 p.m. and, you know, it depends on when you're training in the mornings too, but and you're waking up at 5 or 6, and I'll give some different scenarios, but our body is normally fasted anyway, right? So my point is, and I've read the research, like, there's great research to support the whys behind intermittent fasting. Not a lot for females, more for males, right? We definitely apologize for that, just because the hormone differences. But so number one, our body is fasted anyway, most of the time, right? At night. Number two, here's the other thing. If I guess it's the why behind intermittent fasting. Like, why is somebody doing it? Do they really feel good about it? Like, my sister-in-law intermittent fast, and she does it. She's 16 hours, I think she said. And that's not too, like, in my mind, that's not too extreme. It's skipping breakfast. She's also not a triathlete, right? So, and we don't have, she doesn't have those morning workouts. So we have to start to kind of put the whole picture together. So here's the thing. If you're waking up at dark 30 and you've got a morning session, right? Qualify what that morning session is doing for you, or what you're trying to do. Is it aerobic? Is it quality-based, speed-based, distance-based? What are you trying to do? So if it's aerobic-based, you could probably back me in the corner and get to convince me to say, I probably don't have to eat anything before that session. If it's aerobic, if it's under an hour, and if I'm a male, I would probably say, okay, probably yes. But there's a lot of what ifs, and it depends. Like, what if you wake up hungry? Well, you have to, like, respect your hunger, right? Don't stop yourself, number one. But I don't know. I have a problem with intermittent fasting with both genders, with triathlon, because we know we usually train two times a day, and one is early morning. And that's where I have a problem with it, because remember, again, on a normal night's sleep, we're waking up in a fasted state, right? So we're malnourished and we're dehydrated. And if you're going to try to train malnourished and dehydrated, how much of a good training response are you actually going to get, right? So I put my coach's hat on there, right? If you want to get anything like even a mid to high zone 2 and above effort, I don't know if intermittent fasting is really it, right? And for people who want to lose weight and do IF, there are many better ways to do it. And obviously looking at optimizing blood sugar is the key way to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and I agree with you on the dehydration. So I have a husband that is not a triathlete, and he gets his jollies off of weighing himself before he goes to bed and when he wakes up in the morning, and just tries to see. There have been nights, I'm not exaggerating, you guys, he has lost 8 pounds overnight. I'm like, are you snoring through your
Yeah.
lungs? Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you losing 8 pounds overnight? But he just
Yeah.
does. He sweats. I guess he gets up and goes to the bathroom. I'm like, how much are you peeing? Like, it blows my mind.
And just through normal respiration, you're losing water also.
Yeah. So I've done it a few times way in the morning and the night when I remember to do it. And it's 2 or 3 pounds, but nowhere near the 8 pounds he loses
Yeah.
nightly. He'll be like, I weigh 194. I'm like, yeah, that's not real.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, somebody asked this really interesting question. This is more about supplements. Christy wanted to know, and this is going to not make a lot of sense to everybody, so I'm going to try my best and explain it. What is your view on BCAA? That's something chain amino acids and collagen.
Yep.
Do we need to take them if we're already taking WPI? So I'm not sure what that is, Christy, but maybe Bob can tell us about those.
Yep. I got you, Christy. I'm on board with you. Okay, so let me start with BCAAs, branched chain amino acids. So these are 3 amino acids that are essential. So our body needs them, right? It's leucine, isoleucine, and valine, right? So those are 3 specific amino acids. They're called branched chain. They've been so popular for probably 25 years. It seems to come in and out of research, whether or not they're popular or not popular. I will say right now, the research has been stating that they are not as necessary as we have thought previously. And the reason, now I will complicate this. If you're not eating a lot of protein, or maybe you're plant-based and you aren't eating a lot of protein, right? And you just struggle with protein, having a BCAA powder throughout the day, I think it'd be totally fine, right? But to your point, I think she also mentioned she's taken WPI, which is whey protein isolate, usually in a powder format, can be in liquid format. That also gives you all these branched chain amino acids also. So I do think if you're using whey protein isolate or like one of those, that type of protein powder each day, there's no need for branched chain amino acids. There's absolutely no need. And in fact, there's probably, I mean, even if you didn't eat a lot of protein, the first place I would go is to see how we could get more food-based protein before using a branched chain amino acid powder. It's just like the research just doesn't tell us that it's absolutely necessary, right?
Okay.
So that's it. You also asked about collagen. So collagen is a really, really interesting supplement. Super popular. It's actually, so it's part of almost everything in our body, right? Our skin, our nails, our hair, our tissues, our tendons, like you name it, it's probably there. What we know with aging is our collagen decreases quite significantly, like everything else does with aging. I mean, it's just part of the aging process. Unfortunately, there are about 16 different types of collagen. And I'm not going to name them all because I don't know them all, but the different types reflect what it does in the body. So for example, there's some collagen powder supplements on the market that claim, oh, you take our collagen and your hair will look beautiful, your nails will be nice and strong, and your skin will look awesome. That's not the type of collagen that actually helps with joints and tendons, right? So you kind of need to be careful. Like if you're going to take collagen, like if you're an aging triathlete, you're like, oh, my knees are killing me, or shoulder, whatever, you probably are looking at collagen more for joints and tendons and not hair, skin, and nails, right? So it kind of depends. Like I'm not anti-collagen. I think it actually has its worth for sure. I just think we need to be smart at choosing the different type based on what we're needing it for.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Yeah, I think that there's been so much, we hear so much, oh, you should be drinking bone broth. Oh, you should be drinking kombucha. Oh, you should be drinking whatever, these probiotics. Oh my gosh, like there's a lot out there that we hear, and we read the magazines, we read all the stuff, and it's hard to know. And that makes sense. It'd be something that would be very hard for your typical lay athlete to tease out, what should we be taking? Not.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's see. Does anybody else have other questions for Bob in the Q&A here? Go ahead and put them in if you have them, because we're going to wrap it up here in a minute. But I have a personal question. This is just interesting. What about beet powder? Should we be taking beet powder?
Yes. So let's back up to why beet powder, right? So this comes in the supplement category of nitrates. So nitrates are these compounds in your body that are precursors to nitric oxide. And so what nitric oxide does in our body is it vasodilates, or it makes our arteries bigger, right? If our arteries become more big, or not bigger, but become better at delivering blood and nutrients, now we're getting more nutrients, more blood to our muscles, right? So it makes total sense. Nitrates have actually been really supported well in the research, and that's where beets come into play, or beet powder, right? I'm a big fan of beets. I love beets myself. You would have to eat so many beets though to get that ergogenic performance enhancing effect. That's where these beet powders come into play. 100%. Beet powder works because nitrates, or because beet powder has nitrates. Nitrates are the precursor to nitric oxide, which helps the blood vessels, right? Help blood. Absolutely 100%. Like that is, for me, that's just more of a health thing, right? So I try to get people to eat more beets. And if they say no, I'm like, okay, is there an opportunity to get some beet powder? Because it's pretty easy to find too. Like you put in smoothies or like wherever. It's just it's an acquired taste sometimes. So you have to mix it well, right?
Yeah. And not be afraid of the pink pea that comes out later.
Exactly.
Now, in the beet powder too, you're not getting the sugar that you would if you were eating a beet, because beets are pretty high carb. I mean, they are carb. That's what they are. So, or pretty much fiber.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. That's one of the ergogenic aids. I'm not a supplement person, but that's one of the ones that I've been a little bit like, maybe I should look at that, because it does seem like there's some pretty good science on it. So
absolutely. Well, can I add something, Ali, to that?
Yeah,
to that
go
point?
ahead.
I don't know the age of everyone that's listening on here, but I would just wholeheartedly say, please get blood work done on yourself at least once or twice a year. And not just I go to my physician and they do like what's a normal blood work panel. It's called a CBC, a complete blood count. That's not going to give you a lot of information. Like endurance athletes, and we need different things, but I like, you need a full iron panels test, vitamin B12, vitamin D, magnesium. I mean, a full blood lipid panel, blood fats panel, like the cholesterol panel, right? So I would encourage that, because you hit the supplements, right? Because I'm not a big, pill pusher. However, here's what I've been noticing lately. A lot of athletes are now presenting with deficiencies in these nutrients that we actually need to look at their daily nutrition food and say, oh, we need to try to influence, maybe you have low iron. Okay, what can we do from a food perspective to increase iron? If we can't increase it enough, yes, we have to look at a supplement. So it's kind of the whole test, don't guess, right? So get yourself tested. I mean, blood work is so easy these days, but at least once or twice a year minimum, right? I try to have endurance athletes match their training cycles if they're training a lot, but definitely like once in the beginning of the year or the beginning of training, and then maybe once after you rest from the competition season, just to see how it's changed a little bit. That I feel so strongly about that type of testing, especially as we age.
Wow, that's really good. And then like, how would we analyze that data when we get it? Should we sit down with our family doctor? How do we look at that?
If the doc is more of like a sport med doc, they'll know how to interpret it. And like if you have that physician, you're like, oh yeah, because most endurance athletes try to choose physicians who kind of know about sport, right? Yeah. If you feel comfortable that your physician or your practitioner is that person that will actually respect you as an endurance athlete also, as well as a male or female, you can absolutely have that discussion with him or her. I will say that these days, there are a lot of sport dietitians. We know what we're doing around blood work too. So that if you find a qualified sport dietitian who actually knows about endurance athletes, and there is a difference in my trade right now. There's a lot of us that kind of work with team sports and don't know a lot about endurance, and then vice versa, obviously, right? Okay. So you can go to a sport dietitian that knows endurance. You can go to a physician. There's also a lot of opportunities outside of that. So if you guys have heard of Inside Tracker before, that's one that is just blown up. It's a blood, what would you describe it as? As a blood work analysis company, but I actually use that in my practice with athletes because their deliverables, their interpretations are amazing. Like it just doesn't give you a list of numbers. It gives you like food. Oh, Ellie, you're low in iron. Here are the foods that can increase your iron stores. Here are the recommendations, right? So it makes it so much easier, and it's actually very engaging, and it's a tracking device too. So if you do it once a year, you can actually see your progress every single year. Really, really cool.
Inside Tracker, it's called. Okay.
Tracker. Yep.
While we're talking about resources, tell us about your podcast that you recently started.
So I partnered up with my old colleague, Dina Griffin. And last year we started December 1st was our launch. And it's called the Inside Sports Nutrition Podcast. And literally our goal, we publish it every week. It comes out every Wednesday morning. Our goal is to kind of bring real life sport nutrition to athletes. So like some of these podcasts are real life, but they have no idea what they're talking about with science. And some of the podcasts are all science and they don't know what they're talking about real life, right? So as sport dietitians, we're delivering we've talked about metabolic efficiency, which we kind of talked about. We interviewed Stacy Sims. We interviewed Tim O'Donnell. We just interviewed a really well prominent exercise physiologist regarding hydration and electrolytes and sweat and fluids. So it's just like I'm biased, of course, but I think it's probably one of the best podcasts out there for sport nutrition for athletes, right?
I'm so excited. I'm totally going to binge listen now that you've told me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, that sounds so good. Oh my gosh, that sounds really awesome. Because that's one thing, I mean, we get asked a lot as coaches is kind of like, can you help me with my sports nutrition? And we can give recommendations, but as you know, that's not in our scope of work as far as like providing plans. And so it's good to know there would be a resource like that we could send people toward. And I mean, how much do you guys partner up with coaches? Like, do you guys do that? Someone sends an athlete your direction and you guys help them with their...
Absolutely.
Is that basically
all the time. Yeah. We actually we, as a sport dietitian, I like to think of myself as part of your performance team, right? So the coach, the athlete is in the middle and the coach is right there. And then around you, you have your performance team. So you have a sport dietitian, you have maybe a physician, massage therapist, whoever it is. But I think we fit really well. Like sport dietitians should be on performance teams to help you, kind of navigate your athletes and your services better.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I will definitely be doing that because we don't have a lot of them around here. We have a couple, but I think some have moved on to other things. And so I'm really excited to be back in touch that you're going to be my go-to. I'm going to send like 100. So if you get all these people from Alabama, you're going to know where they're coming from now. That's where they're coming from.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. So, okay. So we have the podcast. We have your website is eNRGperformance.com, eNRGperformance.com. Okay, correct. Cool. That's great. Well, you guys can reach out to Bob if you want to. And I looked at your prices are not crazy. I mean, you have like a consultation you guys do for people that's not expensive. And, so don't you guys think that this is something for like, Bill Gates people. This is accessible for regular athletes. I wanted to mention that too. Like I said, this was not supposed to be a commercial for Bob, but I'm such a Bob fan that I do want people to take advantage of all the things that he's learned over the years and that he knows. So really respect everything you've done and for our sport and how you've been involved in it. So
thank you so much. I appreciate your very kind words.
Yeah, guys. And so guys, if you come up with questions afterward, you can always send them to me or you can get in touch with Bob through his website and ask him questions. And with that, we'll thank him for his time and we'll be excited to, I feel like we need to have you on like once a year now. I tell you what, I'm going to have my blood tested. I'm going to have you back on.
Ali, go to my website and click on testing and then you'll see that inside tracker and you'll be able to see what I was talking about there.
Okay. That's great. I will do it. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks guys. And I hope everybody has a fabulous rest of your week. And thanks, Bob, so much. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be talking.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye, guys.